Hi, and welcome to the fourth session of Introduction to Java, offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. My name is Scott Bartow, and this will be the final session of a four-part series for Introduction to Java. And what we started to cover last session was the switch command. And to use the switch, instead of using this ginormous nested if-else loop, the switch comes in very handy. So let's say, so the way the switch is set up is you start with the switch command and you have a conditional expression and then you follow it with different cases of the results of that expression. So the best way to show you is to show you with an example. So why don't we do the days of the week? Okay, so I will start with, once again, here's our basic structure of an a Java program. So if you look off to the left of my screen, you can see that I start with a public class with a class name of main, capital M main, followed by a opening curly bracket. And then down below here on the last line, I have a closing curly bracket under the P in public to close out the class. And then inside the class, I have the main method using public space, static space, void space, main. Main is the name of the main method with arguments of string, bracket, bracket, space, args. And then you end it with a closing parenthesis, and then followed by a space, an opening curly bracket, and then down below, I have a closing curly bracket under the P in public for the main method. All right, so I'm going to put everything inside my main method, and the main method is inside my main class. So talking about the switch, what I'll do is I will start with creating a variable that's of type int, integer. So int, and I'll call the variable day. I'm going to set this to, why don't I set it to 6? And then close out the statement with a semicolon and hit enter a couple times. And now I'm going to start with my switch. So the command is switch, followed by parentheses, and in the parentheses, I'm going to have day. All right, so whatever the value of day is going to be inside the parentheses. And then I close it out with a closing parenthesis, followed by a space, an opening curly bracket. I'll hit enter a bunch of times, and I'll make sure I put my closing curly bracket to close out the switch. So the closing curly bracket should be underneath the S in switch. Now inside the switch, I'm going to have cases. So case, I use the command word case, space, and then I'll do 1, semicolon. And then indented inside case 1, I'm going to do a sys out print line. Parenthesis and double quotes, and I'll say Monday. All right, so case 1 will be for Monday. When my variable day has a value of 1, then I'm going to print out Monday, followed by closing parenthesis and semicolon. Hit enter, and I'll break out of here. And I'll end the break with a semicolon. All right, so there's 7 days in the week. So I'm going to need copy this 6 times. All right, so copy this. And I'm going to need to reproduce this. 6 more cases. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then the last one, I believe, is default. The keyword. All right, so I'll just do default. Semicolon. So if it's a 1, I'm going to print out Monday. If it's a 2, so up here, I'll change the case from 1 to 2. And I don't want to print out Monday. If it's a 2, I want to print out Tuesday. And then case 3, I'll change that. I'll change that to Wednesday. And etc., etc. All right. I get these done real fast. Thursday. And then 5 is going to be a Friday. 6 will be Saturday. Friday. Finally, 6 is Saturday. And then default is for all others. And I'll call all others, I'll do a sysout print line, parenthesis, and I'm going to call this Sunday. All right, and semicolon at the end. All right, now I can get rid of some of these lines and bring up my closing curly bracket to close out my switch. And that should be it. So what I'll do now is I'll run it. And remember, we have our day set to 6. So 6 is going to come down here for case 6, and it will print out the word Saturday. All right. So I'm going to run this. Now this is using a switch in the case. Isn't like something. Default error case 1. Day equals 6. And switch day. All right, let me see what I'm doing wrong here. All right, let's see. Sorry, after the keyword case, and then you have your value that you're testing for, it's the following the value, you have a colon, not a semicolon. So that's what it doesn't like in my program. And I just have to change all these semicolons to a colon. 6, and finally 7. All right, I'm going to run it now. Let's see if Saturday comes out off to the right of my screen. And it does, yeah. All right, let's see what happens if I enter the number 8. Now 8 should come down here, and that's not case 1, it's not case 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it should hit the default and print out Sunday. So in this case, default is like an else, right? It's all else, all the remaining values that it could be. All right, so let's see what happens if what if I choose 2 and run it, and I should get Tuesday printed out. And it does. All right. So in Java, when Java reaches a break keyword, it breaks out of the switch block. So with day, the variable day having a value of 2, when it comes down to the case 2, it does the sysout print line, and it prints out Tuesday, as you can see off to the right. It printed Tuesday, and then it comes down to this break, and what break will do is it'll break it out of the switch. So it'll bring you all the way down here. And I can prove that by, outside of the switch, I can do a system out.println line, parenthesis, and say I'm out of the switch. Quotes that and semicolon. Okay, so now I'm going to run this. Should print out Tuesday, and then it should print out I'm out of the switch. And it does. You can see on my results screen, I've got Tuesday and then out of the switch. All right, so that's what break does. It pops you right out. When a match is found, when a case becomes true, like for this example, day has a value of 2. So I'm hitting case 2. When this is true, it'll do what's inside case 2, and it'll hit the break, and it'll come right out. All right, so I covered the default. Using default is similar to using the keyword else, but you use default instead when you're dealing with a switch case. And this is extremely more readable and more efficient than doing a big nested if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else statement. So if you're going to have more than like an if, else if, I would go and use a switch case in Java. All right, let's move on to loops in Java. So in Java, we have a while loop and a for loop. So what I'm going to do here is get rid of the switch case that we just discussed, and let's talk about loops. All right, so in Java, the first loop we're going to go over, there are 2 loops in Java. There's the while loop and the for loop. So first, we're going to talk about the while loop. The while loop loops through a block of code as long as a specified condition is true. All right. Okay, so say we have a, get rid of this sysout print. So if I'm gonna, I'll define a variable of type int I equals 0 equals 0 semicolon. All right. And then I'll have my while loop. All right, so it's while space, and then in parentheses, just like the conditional statements, the if else. All right. So while I is less than 5, parenthesis, space, and then we have our curly brackets. Hit enter a few times, and then do the closing curly bracket under the W in while. And now indented in our while loop, we're going to say, all right, system dot out, print line, parenthesis, and then we're going to print out the variable I. So whatever I is, we'll print it out. And close out the statement with a semicolon, hit enter, and now here I'm going to increment I by 1. All right, so I equals 0, and then I'll hit my while statement, and while what's inside the while statement will execute as long as the condition is true. So in this case, 0, I equals 0, so 0 is less than 5, that's true. It'll come down, it'll print out I, which will be 0. It'll increment I by 1 with I plus plus. So now I equals 0 plus 1, which is 1. Then it'll come back up and it'll loop. It'll hit the end of the while, it'll come back up, and it'll retest I. So now I equals 1. 1 is less than 5. It'll come inside the while loop, it'll print I, which will be 1. And then increment I by 1, which is now 1 plus 1 is 2. And comes back up and keeps on repeating the loop until I is equal to or greater than equal to 5. If I were to be equal to 5, it can't be less than 5, so then the while loop would end. And just like the switch case, once a case is true, it gets out of the switch, right? It breaks out. So once this condition I less than 5 is not true, it's false, then it's going to break out of the while loop, and it will come down to the outside of the closing curly brackets for the while. All right, so let's run this, and it should print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I believe. Less than 5. No, 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is what it should print out. Error. Okay. Main, public slash main. I've got these curly brackets. I don't have a curly bracket, an opening curly bracket in the beginning of my while loop. So, all right. So, I've got enough opening and closing curly brackets. So I'll rerun this, and now it should do the while loop, and it does print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I is incremented, once I has a value of 4 and it's incremented by 1, now it's going to have a value of 5, and it'll come up here to the while. It'll do this conditional, and it'll say, is 5 less than 5? It'll say, nope, that's false. It'll pop down here outside of the while loop. Now, what would happen if I incremented first and then did the print? So if I cut I plus plus and do that before I print, all right, so now I come in here, I increment first, and then I print. And what do you predict will happen? Will it knock it out of the while loop? Let's see. All right, so now it doesn't print 0, but it prints 5, right? All right. So when I'm incrementing after printing, it printed the original value of I, which was 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. But now it's printing the incremented value of I. So the first print will be the value 1, and then it'll do 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so it doesn't break out of the while loop. Once you're past the condition of I being less than 5, it'll do whatever inside the while loop, and then come back up to the while statement and and look to see if the condition is still true. If it's not, it will. If it turns out to be not true, it turns out to be false, it'll break out of the while loop. So in Java, there is something called a do while. All right. So in a do while, the loop will execute the code block once before checking if the condition is true. Then it will repeat the loop as long as the condition is true. So let's see an example of this using the do while. All right, so I'll start off with my variable I being of type int and having a value of 0. So I'm going to start with 0. Now, I use the command do space and opening curly brackets. And I'm going to get rid of this while. Oops. All right, let's start from scratch. All right, so I do opening curly brackets right here. All right, then a couple lines down, I'll do my closing curly bracket so I don't forget. I position the closing curly bracket under the D and do. And then inside my do, I'm going to type, I'll do a system dot out dot print line. I'm going to print out the value of I, semicolon. Hit enter. And now I'm going to increment I by 1. And you do that, you do the incrementing of I by 1 by using the variable name plus plus. And that's going to be it for inside my do statement. I'll get rid of this extra line. And then underneath the closing curly bracket for the do, here I'll do the while. Space, in parentheses, I'll do I is less than 5. Oops. So I is less than 5, closing parentheses, semicolon. All right, let's give this a try. All right. And what it prints out is just like before we had the while statement. Now remember, with the do while, the loop will always be executed at least once. All right, so that's sort of the point of using a do while. Instead of what we did earlier, where we had a while statement, while I is less than 5, and then inside of it we would print out I, and we would increment I by 1. So even if this condition was false, I would print out this do. I would print out I and increment I by 1. All right, so the first time, and then it would just stop. All right, so if I make while I is greater than 5, which it's not, it's going to be 0 in this case. So I'll make it greater than 5, and you can see what it will do is it'll print out the value of I, which will be, so it's going to print out 0, and it'll increment I by 1. So now I has a value of 1, and then it'll drop out of the do. And when it does the while, it'll be false and it'll drop out. So all it's going to do is print 0. All right. So it'll execute the stuff inside the do, the command or the statements inside the do once, even if the while is false. If the while is true, it'll execute it the first time, and then as many times it'll loop around as till the condition is false for the while. So I'm going to run this. It should just print out 0. And that's what it does. So that's the point of using the do while. If you want it to execute the first time, whether the while condition is true or false, that's why you would use that. All right, so next we're going to talk about the second Java loop, which is the for loop. So I'll get rid of this information. All right, so now with the for loop, when you know exactly how many times you want to loop through a block of code, you use the for loop. Remember, the while loop is used when you have when you want your code, a block of code, to be executed as long as the condition is true. Whereas a for loop, where a block of code is executed as for a set number of times. So that's the difference between the two loops. So let's look at an example of a for loop. So if I have for, and then I have, I'll declare the variable I of type int, and I'll give it a value of 0, semicolon, space, and then I have my condition. I is going to be less than 5, semicolon, space, and then I'm going to increment I by 1, I plus plus. And then I'll close out the parenthesis, and then I will do a curly bracket. I'll hit enter a few times, and I'll do my closing curly bracket for the for loop. So it'll be directly under the F in for. And now here, every time I loop, indented inside the for loop, I'm going to do a system out, that print line, parenthesis, and I'm going to print out the value of I, and I'll run it. All right, so just like our previous while loop example, it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So with the for loop inside the parentheses, first you have the variable declaration, right, and initialization. Then you have I less than 5, so you have the condition that has to be true for you to keep on looping. And then you have the incrementation of the variable, all inside the parentheses of the for loop. Okay. Another thing that you can use in Java, let me just show you real quick another for loop example. All right, so say you have, all right, so so this example is going to be for space parenthesis int I equals 0, int I equals 0, semicolon, and then you have the condition I is going to be less than or equal to 10, semicolon, and I is going to equal I plus 2. Have to get it on the right line. So I have I equals I plus 2. end parenthesis, semicolon, or not semicolon, sorry, space, curly brackets. There we go. And now inside my for loop, I'm gonna print out the value of I. So here we have I equals 0, and it's of type int. And then you have the condition, I is less than or equal to 10. And then you have the incrementation, you have I equals I plus 2. So constantly, every time I loop, I'm adding 2 to the value of I. So what this should do is I'm starting with 0, right? I equals 0. So it should print out 0, then it should print out 2, then 4, then 6, 8, 10. So it's all the even numbers up to from 0 to 10. So I'm going to run this and let's see what happens. And there we go, 0 to 10, the even numbers. Now, say I only wanted to, say I didn't want to print out the value 0 in this case. I want the even numbers from 2 to 10. So to do that, I would just make, when I'm declaring the value of, when I'm declaring the variable I and giving a value, instead of giving a value of 0, I give it a value of 2. All right. And I'll run this. And it should be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And that's what it is. All right. So, so that's it for the for loop. Except the for loop also has, just like the while loop has a do while, for loop has a for each loop. It's used exclusively to loop through elements in an array. So we haven't spoken about arrays yet, but I'll show you using the for each how to use the for loop to loop around items in an array. All right, so I'll get rid of this and I'll start fresh. So first I'm going to create an array of type string. All right, so string, and then the array is created by having opening and closing brackets, space, and then I'm going to name my array cars. All right, and then they are going to equal curly brackets, and then each car is going to be a string, so it has to be surrounded by double quotes or single quotes. So I'll use double quotes, and I'm going to use, let's say, how about Volkswagen, double quotes, and these items inside of a list are concatenated with commas. So I'll put a comma after Volkswagen, and then my next one will be, how about Audi, double quotes, next one, Toyota, quotes, comma, and I'll do one more. Double quotes, and let's just say, that's another one. How about Jaguar? Jaguar. Double quotes. Now close it out with a curly brackets. All right, so that and a semicolon, and that is my array. All right, my array named cars with 4 items in it: Volkswagen, Audi, Toyota, and Jaguar. All right, so now I'm ready for my for loop. So I have 4 space, and then in parentheses, I'm going to pass string I colon, and then the name of the array, which is cars. And then close it out with a parenthesis, space, curly bracket, hit enter a couple times, and remember to do the closing curly bracket, which will go directly under the F in 4. And now inside my inside my for loop, what I want to do is indent, and I'm going to put system out the print line I. Let's see that. All right. Okay, so string I, colon cars, and what this will do is it will loop around each item inside of our array. So the first thing that you printed out will be Volkswagen, then Audi, then Toyota, then Jaguar. All right. So I will run this. And there we go. It prints out each item on a separate line that's in our array named cars. Now, what if I wanted to just print out one particular item from our array? So I want to print out Toyota. Okay, so the way to do this is in my for, well, I wouldn't use the for loop. I'll tell you about that in the section on arrays. But say I want to do, let's see, so I has a value of 0. So say I wanted to print out I wanted to do a for loop. Well, if I wanted to print out, well, never mind. I'll tell you about that in the array section. All right, so that's it for the for loops. Now, real quick, I just want to tell you about break and continue, and then I'll talk about arrays further. All right, so break and continue. Let's see. So we use the break in the switch case command. But break can also be used to jump outside of a loop. So for example, all right, I'm going to get rid of the array. So say I had, I've got a nice for loop, all right. And I have int I equals 0, semicolon. Remember, you declare the variable first inside the parentheses of a for loop. Then you have your conditional, I is less than 10, semicolon. And then lastly, you want to increment I. In this case, we're going to increment by 1, so I plus plus. And then you close out the parentheses, space, and you have your curly brackets. Hit enter a few times, do your closing curly bracket for the for loop. But then inside the for loop, we're going to have an if. So if space, and then if the condition I equal 4, parenthesis, space, and curly brackets, enter a couple times, closing curly brackets for underneath the I and if. And then if this happens, we're going to break out of the loop. When I hit 4, I want out. All right. All right, that's my conditional, but also inside the for loop, outside of the if conditional, I am going to print system.out.println I semicolon. All right. So this will run. Now I starts with the value of 0. So what it's going to print out is going to print out 0, 1, 2, 3. When I equals 4, it's going to hit this if conditional, and it's going to break out of my for loop. So that's it. So to print 0, 1, 2, 3, I hit 4, boom, I'm out. and it won't even print because it'll go all the way outside of the for loop. Right? So here we go. You should see 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's all. And that's what we get. If you look off to the right, I have 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, so that's how we use the break command in a for loop. Now, the continue command, it breaks one iteration in the loop. If a specified condition occurs, and then when the specified condition occurs, and then it continues with the next iteration in the loop. So what it's going to do, so looking at our for loop, right? We have for int I equals 0, so it's set to 0. And our condition is when as long as I is less than 10, and then we're going to increment I by 1. All right, so, but if I equals 4, we're not going to do this print, but we continue with the for loop. So as long as we're using, instead of using break, we're using continue. Continue, all right. So continue will not print out when I equals 4. All right, so what my output should be is 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because when it's 10, then it's not going to continue with the for loop because 10 can't be less than 10. So that's what I'm predicting. It will print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's what it did. So 0, 1, 2, 3 is skips 4 because we're using continue. And then you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that is the break and the continue. And what about a break and continue in a while loop? All right. So you've seen the break in the switch case, you've seen the break and continue used in a for loop. But a while loop's a little bit different. All right, so let's see what happens. All right, so with a while loop, first I'm going to declare my variable of type integer. So int I equals 0, semicolon, hit enter a couple times. Now here I'll have my while loop, while, in parentheses, I is less than 10. Same condition as with the for loop we just did. I'll hit my, after the closing parenthesis, opening curly brackets and closing curly brackets under the W and while. I'll indent. And what I'm going to do is do a system dot out print line parenthesis I. So I want to print out the value of I, semicolon, hit enter, and then I'm going to increment I by 1, semicolon, and let me just, all right, so we're incrementing I by 1, and then, all right, so here we're going to do our if condition. If I, just like before with our for loop, equals 4, then open curly brackets, hit enter a couple times, closing curly brackets. Now, first we're going to try and use the break for the while loop. So we break, semicolon, and that should be it. We got closing curly brackets, closing curly brackets. All right, so now when I run this, it should print I, and then what do you think is going to happen? In while loops. All right, so what it should do is when it hits 4, it should break out of the while loop. So it should print 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's it. Similar to the for loop. So let's see. 0, 1, 2, 3. There you go. Now what happens if we put a continue there instead of a break? All right. So here it's a little bit different, right? I'll move the system print out of here, and I will put it outside of the if statement, inside the while loop. And I'm going to increment inside the if. There's my if. I put it here. I'll do a continue instead of the break. Continue, system print. And then, so if the condition is 4, if I equals 4, I'm going to increment by 1. And then we're going to continue. If I don't increment by 1, then I'll constantly be looping. And it would be an infinite loop. Here, let me explain. So outside the condition of I equals 4, I'm going to print out I, and then I'm going to increment I plus plus. Semicolon, all right. I'll run that. And what it does is it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, skips 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right. So here's how it's set up. I create a variable named I'll type int, and I give it a value of 0. The while condition is I, as long as I is less than 10, it will loop. Inside the loop, I have an if statement. If I is equal to 4, I'm going to increment I, so now I equals 5, and we're going to continue, which using the continue will bring me right back up to the while loop, and it will not do the print and another incrementation. So by incrementing it inside the if, I made I equal to 5. Now it comes up here, falls in the while. The while condition is true. 5 is less than 10, and it hits the if. If I equals 4, it doesn't. It equals 5. It'll go to the end of the if statement, and it'll print out I, which it prints out 5, and then it increments it. Now I'm up to 6, and it does the while loop till 6, 7, 8, 9, and till I is equal to 10, and then the while loop ends. All right, so that's how you use the continue and the break inside a for loop or a while loop. All right. So now let's talk about arrays for just a little bit. So with arrays, we had our little cars array earlier. So with arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable. All right. So previously we had the cars array. So the variable was cars, named cars, and we had multiple values. We had 4 different types of cars inside of our array. So instead of declaring separate value or variables for each of those 4 car values, so to declare an array, you define the variable type with square brackets. All right, so So what we do is, first you have to have the type, just like any variable. When you're declaring a variable, you start with the type, and then you have the variable name. And with an array, we start with the type, and then we have open and closing square brackets, space, and then the name of the array. All right, so something like this. So say we have an array of type string, space, or no space, open and closing brackets, space, and then the name of our array. So we're going to call our array chars again, semicolon, and that's how you would define a nice array. So we're going to give our array values. So we have the equal sign, and then you have the opening curly bracket, and then these are of type string, so they have to be surrounded with double quotes or single quotes. And once again, what do we have? I don't remember. Volkswagen, double quotes, and then we have Toyota, and lastly Jaguar, and closing brackets, closing curly brackets. Okay, so that's our array, our cars array of type string with 4 items in it. We have Volkswagen, Audi, Toyota, Jaguar. Now, what if you wanted a different type? All right, so what if we wanted an integer string array? So opening and closing brackets, and we'll call this equals, and then in curly brackets, we're going to, now we don't need quotes around these items inside of our array because this is of type integer. So these are whole numbers, no decimals, and they're not strings. So if we do 10, comma, 20, comma, 30, comma, 40, and then close it out with a curly bracket, that is, and semicolon up here with our cars array. All right, so now we have 2 arrays. We have a cars array and we have a mynum array. What if we want to access the items inside of our array? All right, so I'm going to move our int array down here. All right, so you have to keep in mind that with an array in Java, the position of the first item in the array, which is Volkswagen, that position is not 1. The index number is actually 0. So it starts with 0. Then Audi, the second item, has a position in an index of 1. Toyota has 2, and Jaguar has 3. So if I want to access, say, Toyota, what I can do is I can print it out, system.out.println, parentheses, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the name of the array, cars, and I'll do square bracket, and I want to print out Toyota. So if Volkswagen is position 0, Audi's position 1, Toyota's position 2. So inside the square brackets, I do a 2, and I close out the square brackets, close out the parenthesis, and I do a semicolon. And that's all there is about that. I'll do even a single line comment. So // and I'll say outputs, Toyota. All right, ready? Here we go. So that's what should be printed out. The third item in position 2 of our cars array and it does print out Toyota. All right. So if I wanted to print out, well, let's just check out a couple of functions. What if I wanted to change a value in my array? All right. So I've got my cars array, and then below that, if I wanted to change, I want to change Audi to Honda. All right, so Audi's in position 1. So Volkswagen 0, Audi's in position 1. So what I do is I state the name of my array that I want to make the change to, and then I have cars, I have square bracket, and I want to change the name of Audi to Honda. So I want to choose the position of 1 where Audi lives, and then close it out with a curly bracket, space equal to, and I'm going to call this Honda. All right. And I'll do a semicolon. Now, I want to see that this change is taking place. So what I'll do is I will print out, instead of printing out what's in position 2, which is Toyota, I'm going to print out what's in position 1, which it was Audi, and it's going to be changed to Honda. So I should print out Honda. And I've changed my comment. Output Honda. All right, let's run it. This is how you change an item inside of an array. And it prints out Honda. All right. So now, what if I want to know the length of my array? So, so now my array is that. All right. So say I want to I want to print out my length. All right. So here's my array, my cars array. It has 4 items in it. So the length should come back as 4, because the length function, what it's doing is it's telling me how many items are inside the array. And the way to do that, so I can print it out, and you just name it cars. All right, let's get rid of the comment. So I name my array. So cars dot, and just type in length. And semicolon. All right, and this should output 4. All right, let's run it. And it outputs 4. All right. And all right, so the same with my my number array. So say I reduce it. Just out print my parenthesis, and the name of this array is my num dot length parenthesis and semicolon. All right, so this should print out. I have 3 items in this array, and so it should print out the number 3. And I will comment out this print of the length of the cars arrays. All right, so it should just print out the number 3 at this point. Let's run in, and there you go. All right, so That's it for this session of Introduction to Java. This was the fourth and last session of your Introduction to Java. I hope you enjoyed the class. This course was offered to you generously by Clifton Park Half Moon Library. My name is Scott Bartow, and please, for anybody who hasn't accepted my invitation to my Google Classroom, for those of you that registered for the class, please please accept the invitation. The Google Classroom will remain out there indefinitely, and the exercises and your ability to contact me with any kind of questions will be out there on Google Classroom. So once again, thanks for joining me for Introduction to Java, and I hope to be able to present other tutorials to you at another time. All right, thanks again.